What if the secrets to surviving tough times were right under our noses? Picture a pot of beans simmering with a smoky ham hock, or a crust of stale bread reborn as golden bread pudding. These weren't just recipes, they were lifelines. In Native American and immigrant kitchens alike, families took the simplest scraps and turned them into meals that carried generations through hardship. Before we begin, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss our next journey back in time. Today we're unearthing 10 powerful poor man meals that not only sustained our grandparents but can still inspire resilience and creativity at your own table. Picture a slice of stale bread toasted crisp to stretch its life, then smothered in a creamy white sauce dotted with thin slivers of salty dried beef. This was the famous chipped beef on toast, better known by soldiers as SOS. Though at home, mothers left out the nickname when feeding their children. The taste was unforgettable, buttery richness cut by sharp salt, with the steam rising like comfort itself from the plate. For families during the Great Depression and both World Wars, this dish meant survival. Dried beef didn't spoil the sauce, made a few scraps, feed many mouths, and the toast gave it body. Why did it fade? As fresh meats became affordable and health concerns about sodium grew, chipped beef disappeared from most tables. What once felt hearty now seemed heavy and outdated. But imagine yourself sitting at a mess hall table in the 1940s spoon, scraping the last of that thick gravy. Would you call it comfort food or just a reminder of hardship? Did your grandparents ever mention SOS? Even today, some diners in the Midwest keep it on the menu, a salty echo of tougher times. On a cold winter night when cupboards held little more than a bag of dried peas, families turned necessity into comfort with a steaming pot of pea soup. The peas simmered for hours, breaking down into a thick, earthy broth, while onions added just enough sweetness to balance the flavor. But the real delight came when dumplings, small balls of flour, salt, and water were dropped into the bubbling pot. They puffed up like little clouds, soaking in the savory essence of the soup below. This dish wasn't just food, it was ritual. In Scandinavian immigrant households across the Midwest, pea soup with dumplings became a Thursday tradition, carrying with it both warmth and predictability. Children counted dumplings carefully, ensuring everyone had a fair share, while parents found peace in stretching one simple meal to feed many. Over time, as meat and fresh produce became more accessible, this humble dish faded from dinner tables. Today it lingers mostly in church cookbooks, or as a nostalgic comfort recipe passed down quietly. Do you remember the last time you tasted homemade dumplings? Were they floating in soup or perhaps baked with fruit? Share your memory below your stories. Keep these simple traditions alive. Few meals speak more bluntly about survival than the onion sandwich. Imagine 2 slices of bread, often homemade, sometimes stale, hugging a thick slice of raw onion sprinkled with a pinch of salt and pepper. If luck allowed, there might be a smear of butter or lard. That was lunch for many working men and school children during lean years. The first bite was sharp, fiery, almost overwhelming. Yet it provided vitamins and flavor when fresh produce was scarce. In coal mining towns of Appalachia, men carried these sandwiches into the darkness of the mines. Hours later, the onion's pungent aroma still clung to their clothes and filled the air. Some kids even sprinkled sugar on top to soften the bite, calling it their own kind of poor man's caramelized onion. As wages rose and processed meats became affordable, the onion sandwich vanished, replaced by bologna or ham. Today, it's remembered less as a meal and more as a symbol of grit. Here's a thought. Would you dare trade your turkey club for an onion sandwich just once to taste history? Or would that be one step too far? Your comments keep these memories alive. Drop yours below. When times grew tight, the humble potato often stood between families and hunger. Potato soup was simple, filling, and endlessly adaptable. A few peeled spuds simmered with water and salt could transform into a steaming bowl of comfort. If luck allowed, an onion might be chopped in, or a splash of milk stirred for creaminess. On farms with a cow, a touch of cream turned the dish into something that felt almost indulgent. The smell was gentle yet reassuring, earthy potatoes softening in a bubbling pot, carrying warmth through the house. For Irish immigrant families, this soup carried echoes of famine years where potatoes truly meant life. For Depression-era households, it was proof that with just a handful of ingredients, no one had to go hungry. Today, potato soup shows up more often as a cozy comfort food loaded with bacon and cheese. But back then, it was survival in its purest form. If someone served you a bowl of plain potato soup tonight, would you savor it as a humble treasure or long for all the extras we've grown used to? If you're enjoying this trip, hit like and subscribe for more. In mill towns and mining communities, when meat was a luxury too far out of reach, families made do with what they had, often beans left over from last night's supper. Pinto beans mashed with a fork seasoned with chopped onion and a splash of vinegar became the filling for simple sandwiches. Pressed between thick slices of homemade bread, they were hearty, packed with protein, and most importantly, cheap. Children carried them to school in lunch pails, while fathers tucked them into cloth wraps for long shifts at the factory or mine. A thin smear of mustard might appear if the pantry allowed, adding tang to the otherwise earthy flavor. It wasn't glamorous, but it filled stomachs and gave strength to keep going. Over time, as deli meats and processed foods grew more affordable, bean sandwiches faded away. For many, they remain a memory of survival, a symbol of parents doing everything possible to keep hunger at bay. Could you imagine trading your ham and cheese for a pinto bean sandwich today? Would it feel like a taste of history or simply too plain for modern times? When cupboards were bare and fields offered little else, families turned to the land for survival, often with a shotgun in hand. Rabbit stew became the meal of resilience, made from wild game caught in nearby woods or rabbits raised in backyard hutches. Lean and tough, the meat needed long, slow simmering with potatoes, carrots, onions, and whatever other vegetables the garden could spare. The result was a fragrant stew, hearty enough to stretch one rabbit into a meal that could feed a whole family. For many children during the Great Depression and World War II, the line between pet and protein blurred. Rabbits weren't given names because they weren't meant for companionship, they were meant for the stew pot. Still, the taste of tender meat and rich broth soaked up by dumplings or bread brought warmth on cold nights. As meat rationing eased and supermarkets overflowed with beef and pork, rabbit stew slipped from most tables. Today, it's rarely seen outside of rural homesteads or gourmet menus. What about you? Would you see rabbit stew as a delicacy worth reviving, or a reminder of a time when survival left no room for sentiment? Your comments keep these memories alive. Drop yours below. In farm kitchens across the South, nothing went to waste, not even the bony joint where a pig's leg met its foot. Ham hocks overlooked by the wealthy became the backbone of a meal that could stretch for days. Simmered slowly with dried beans, onions, and a pinch of salt, the meat would eventually fall apart, tender and smoky, flavoring every spoonful of beans with richness. The aroma alone told a story: earthy beans, mingling with the deep, savory scent of pork filling the house while it bubbled on the stove all afternoon. Served with cornbread on the side, it was hearty enough to carry a family through long days of labor. For many, this dish wasn't just food, it was security in a bowl. As refrigeration improved and fresh cuts of meat became more accessible, the ham hock slipped into obscurity, remembered only by older generations. Today, chefs have rediscovered it, turning what was once a poor man's staple into a rustic delicacy. Would you taste it differently, seeing it as a gourmet dish today, or remembering it as pure survival food from the past? Bread pudding was the sweet salvation of lean times, proving that not even stale bread should ever go to waste. Homemakers cubed day-old loaves, soaked them in milk, eggs, sugar, and a sprinkle of cinnamon, then baked the mixture until the top turned golden and the inside stayed soft and custardy. If raisins or nuts were on hand, they became little surprises of sweetness hidden in each bite. The smell of bread pudding baking was a comfort all its own, warm, spicy, and inviting. Children gathered at the kitchen table, eager for a dessert that felt like a treat, even though it was born of necessity. Bakeries sold day-old bread. Cheap and thrifty families transformed it into something that felt almost luxurious. As times improved, the humble bread pudding shifted from survival food to gourmet indulgence. Today, you might find it drizzled with whiskey sauce in fancy restaurants, far removed from its Depression-era origins. Do you remember tasting bread pudding in your childhood? Was it made from scratch at home, or served at a family gathering where nothing ever went to waste? Hoover stew was a meal born straight out of hardship. Its very name, a jab at President Herbert Hoover, blamed for the misery of the Great Depression. Into a single pot went whatever families could spare: elbow macaroni, sliced hot dogs, canned tomatoes, and corn. It wasn't glamorous, but when stirred together and simmered, it became hearty enough to fill a dozen bowls. In the shantytowns known as Hoovervilles, great cauldrons of this stew often bubbled away neighbors, ladling portions to anyone who was hungry. One hot dog could flavor a pot that stretched to feed an entire family, while the pasta and vegetables bulked it up. Soup kitchens adopted it too, swapping ingredients depending on what donations arrived. Sometimes cabbage instead of corn, sometimes government cheese instead of hot dogs. Over time, as America climbed out of poverty, Hoover stew slipped quietly into the background, remembered more for its symbolism than its taste. Today, it exists mostly in history books and family stories. If you were served a bowl of Hoover stew today, would you find comfort in its simplicity, or feel only the weight of the struggle it represents? If you're enjoying this trip, hit like and subscribe for more. Nowhere does human ingenuity shine brighter than in the creation of water pie. Picture this, an empty pie crust filled not with apples or berries, but with plain water mixed with sugar, flour, butter, and a splash of vanilla. It sounds impossible, yet when baked it magically transforms into a silky, custard-like dessert that once felt like a luxury on the most meager tables. During the Great Depression, sugar was a treasure saved for birthdays or Sunday dinners. Water pie stretched that sweetness into something that looked and smelled like abundance. The vanilla aroma drifting from the oven gave families the joy of dessert, even if fruit was far beyond reach. At church suppers, water pies sat quietly among the apple and peach varieties. No one ever admitted who brought them, but every child got a slice. Why did it fade? As prosperity returned, families embraced pies overflowing with fruit cream and chocolate. Water pie, with its humble roots, became a whisper of desperation rather than pride. Can you imagine slicing into a pie made mostly of water? Would you see it as a miracle or a reminder of scarcity? These weren't just poor man meals, they were survival stories written into every bite. From chipped beef on toast to the humble potato soup, each dish carried families through the darkest days with nothing more than thrift and determination. What some might see as scraps our grandparents saw as enough to keep hope alive. Now it's your turn. Have you ever tasted one of these forgotten meals or heard stories about them from your family? Would you bring any of them back to your own kitchen today? Share your thoughts in the comments because your memories keep this history alive. And if this trip down memory lane warmed your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more journeys into America's past. After all, the simplest meals often hold the richest stories.